taken on a model of education in the juvenile court and community schools called project-based learning. And project-based learning is an attempt to bring in real-world skills and real-world interesting topics and to connect the kids both academically and professionally and personally to the work, and to develop the skills that are really going to help them in the future. So what we've allowed our kids to do is actually choose their academic content and choose their path, and then we build the academics around it. So when we put that question to our students, what do you want to study? And what would you like to do, or what would you like to accomplish at the end of that study? We brainstormed, and we had hundreds of things listed on the board, and we narrowed it in and we focused it in. And it was our students that chose gang violence. And when we spoke about it as a class, why would this be an important thing to study? What we heard was, it's interesting, it affects us on a daily basis, it's in our communities, it's in our lives, it's personally impacted us. I also heard from students, it's a complex issue, it's not an easy issue to solve. So that lends itself well to a classroom when you're trying to dig in deep and really get to the root of things. So this documentary is a culmination of our learning. Our students are digging into what the real deep causes of gang violence are. A lot of people want to attribute it to a poor home life, and their parents were never there for them, or maybe they're just violent kids to begin with. And we're going deeper than that. We're looking at society and some of the things that society should be providing all of our kids and isn't providing all of our kids. And then we're looking at the real things that society needs to be doing, so that instead of kids looking up to the older homie and saying, that's what I want to be, or that's what I want to do, kids are looking at books, kids are looking at school and saying, there's another path for me. There's a path that can lead me to success that's a safe success, that's a sure success. So the kids are really digging into some really deep content, and it's been a pretty cool process.
So my name is Luis Javier Rodriguez. I always put Javier now because there's so many Luis Rodriguez's out there. I gotta make sure that people don't get me confused with anybody. I am a writer. I have 15 books in all genres. I am a TV writer. I'm also traveling all over the country and the world. And this is the space, Tia Chucha's Culture Center Bookstore, that me and my wife helped create about 16 years ago. I started when I was 11 years old. And it started with the fact that up to that point, I was getting bullied and broken down and had no friends. At 9 years old, I got jumped and cracked my jaw. I didn't break it, but it just kind of like when it healed, it had a little growth. So my jaw's crooked. And in fact, to this day, I only got 3 places where my teeth meet. And it happened when they hit me, and I never got it fixed. So I was 9 years old, and I was very skinny, and I had this goofy looking jaw. I looked really ugly. Kids make fun of me. Girls called me monkey. I was a terribly isolated, lonely kid. I was very shy and very sensitive. A lot of kids are. And there was no place for me to go. And what happened is a gang broke through the elementary school I was in. And it's in my book, they scared everybody. And I was like, man, I wasn't scared. I was so intrigued. Like, man, I wanted to be like these guys, because I was so like no friends, nothing. I go, I want to be like these guys. They got all this fear. Teachers were scared of them. Everybody was scared, and they were cholos. The first cholos I ever saw. I didn't know they looked different. They had long shirts, tied, button at the top, long pants, big. They were just different, and I just wanted to be in that. So I joined a little club that was kind of the stepping stone towards being in the gang. And the club was the first really gang, beginnings of my gang structure, 11 years old. Again, I just wanted to look for respect. I wanted to belong somewhere. And the gang seemed like the perfect thing.
My name's Eliseo Nunez. I'm 30 years old. I was born and raised, actually I was born in Fallbrook, I was raised in Oceanside. I always wanted to feel loved and accepted. So for the most part, my mindset growing up, especially once I started doing time, like I felt like I didn't have a choice. I felt like, okay, I made this decision to, run the streets with my boys, and my mindset was like, there's no way out of it. I didn't have the courage to ask for help. I didn't know how to ask for help. My mindset was, you know what, I'm gonna take this all the way. My mindset was kind of like, you know what, like this is what I deserve. This is the way I was raised. This is my life. This is how I'm gonna die.
I was born here in California, but growing up, my dad really wasn't around. My mom had a lot of boyfriends and had another stepfather. There was a lot of physical abuse going around in my life. So, and then ended up living in South Central for like 4 or 5 years, and I was the only Mexican kid in school, and my sister, so I was always getting beat up and bullied. So I grew up a very angry kid. So my mom really couldn't control me anymore. She just couldn't handle me. So my dad at that time was already living in Chicago. So she sent me to go live with my dad. And even before then, I was already going there during the summers and the winter times. So I was already making friends in the neighborhood that my dad was at. So by the time I moved to Chicago, I already had a relationship with the kids and the youth and the people in the neighborhood. So by the time I went to high school, I was already transitioning. It was already evident for me just to be a part of whatever gang that was around. And that could have been in any gang, but since most of my friends were in that gang, I just happened to just be a part of it and join with them. Because my dad, like I said, wasn't around at that time too. He was alcoholic, so he really was focused on other things, and so it was just a transition of just being with my homies and hanging with them, and being a part of the gang was part of that for my neighborhood where I was growing up at that time.
In the 7th and 8th grade, I had a teacher who used to call me stupid in front of everybody, and pretty soon I shut down and I became kind of a loner. And by the time I got to high school, we moved to the other side of town, which was difficult, and people right away try and take you in, and I didn't have friends. I didn't feel good about school, and so it was easy kind of to get involved, and that's where it started. You had to go down, like there was one occasion where my homegirls started beating up a young girl who came to a house party, and I was up in the house. It was an apartment, but the upstairs, and I could see them. And like I said, my conscience, I couldn't have that happen, so I went and I told them to stop. And then they turned on me. And they let the girl go, but it was never the same. And I think that was one of the biggest obstacles. And a second time, I went to a wedding, and it wasn't in our barrio, our neighborhood, and we went up, my 2 homegirls at my side, we got there, and as soon as we walked into, it was a hall at a church. It was like the whole wedding party saw us, and they came at us and started calling us names. I looked to my left, I looked to my right, and my homegirls were gone. And they started beating me down, and I realized then, are these really people who have my back? My friends. And so those were difficulties that, I got saved by a man who knew my father, and he took me home, and I'll never forget, my mom would be waiting for me on the couch, and she'd get up, and all bloody, and she just said, that time, prefiero que estuvieras muerta. And that cut, I prefer that you were dead than to not know what you're doing, what's going on. So the difficulty for me more than anything was how I hurt my family.
You know, like, I felt like I didn't have a choice. You know, my mind couldn't captivate good things happening to me. You know, I'm not sure where it came from. It might have been the environment I was raised, but I mean, the environment for the most part was pretty safe. There was a little bit of drug use and stuff like that, but for the most part, I was raised with a good family. You know, growing up, I remember my mom used to stay up, and she couldn't sleep until I got home. I remember I used to get home at 2, 3, 4, 5 in the morning, and I used to go, and because the place we used to live, everybody used to share rooms. You know, I used to sleep in the living room, but my stuff was in my mom's room. And I remember she couldn't sleep, and she used to put a baño in her forehead with alcohol because of the headache that she had. You know, for a while she was very consistent on going to go look for me. She would go drive the neighborhood. She would be like, and at this time I was already super blown, high on my mind, and I remember just getting super frustrated and mad, like, Mom, how dare you embarrassing me here in front of, you know, my homeboys. And I remember one time, and it was the last time she went to go look for me. You know, I wasn't gonna do anything, but I don't know what I had. I had some type of weapon in my hand, and I was just mad. I was like, you know what, you need to get out of here. And she took off, she sped off, and I remember seeing her. She was crying. She was definitely my #1 fan. You know, she used to pick me up from juvenile hall. She used to take me to my classes. She used to enroll me into programs, into rehabs. She used to visit me in prison, the only person that would put money on my books. She would always, you know, she would always cheer me on and tell me that I could do it.
As a young man, Reggie Washington found himself involved in gangs without any awareness or alternative ways to deal with his anger. This led him to prison sentence that would forever change his life. Today, Reggie runs a community-based organization called the Project Aware, an emotional literacy program that aims to educate at-risk youth and prepare them to take responsibility for their thoughts and actions.
I continue using this word because it's the reality of living the life in that lifestyle. My mother was heartbroken. She took it all on her as if it was her fault. And that took a lot of therapy for both of us to do, and that therapy came in the visiting room. And for me to have to sit down there and let her understand that she did the best that she could, but it was a lot of crying. It was years and years of getting in vans. It was over a decade of catching the bus to come visit me. It was 15 years of watching my daughter be raised through a visiting room and having my mother come visit me and go through hours and hours just to see me for an hour. And each time she felt like this was her doing. So it came a time where I had to help her understand that, you know, as kids, sometimes, man, we make choices. But what we have to understand is our choices affect more than just us. So to simply say, it was disappointment at a level that I've never seen until I looked into my mother's eyes.
A lot of people always thought, oh, you know, it's these big organized. It was just neighborhood cliques of young people who were looking for meaning. You know, so I grew up with a lot of people who didn't have family. I was lucky I had a stepfather. You know, my biological wasn't there, but I had a stepfather, somebody who mentored me. But a lot of my friends didn't have that. A lot of my friends' mothers were working, you know, 14, 15 hours a day. So we were all, you know, they called us back in those days latchkey kids because, you know, there weren't any parents around. So as young people, we started looking for the meaning that we weren't getting from the other institutions.
Let me add something to that too, because, you know, the similarities too, you know, being raised in a poor community, you know, I had a stepfather in my life just till I was about 10, going on 11. But primarily, I was raised in a single parent household too, and you know, we got to see those similarities too when you think about why the streets meant so much to me was because I wasn't, you know, my mom worked sometimes up to 3 jobs. For me and my 2 sisters, we lived in even though we lived in a poor community, the rents were still high, and so I often think like, how did I latch onto the streets? So you know, I mean, the streets, you know, that was my life for a long time, and you know, I mean, you can't blame the single parents, but I was looking for love, I was looking for attention, I was looking for acceptance, and I wanted to be seen, and so, you know, unfortunately, that's part of the thing, being raised sometimes with a single parent.
How did your parents feel when you guys first got locked up and put away for a long time?
Wow. I'll start. My parents, they were ashamed. They were ashamed that they did a bad job. You know, they would visit me, they would be there, but they wouldn't talk to me. It was sad because the more that I would get into trouble, the more they would like disown me, kind of like feeling like dang, like a disappointment towards them. And there was no way, they weren't prepared to build me up. They weren't. They didn't have the knowledge. They didn't have no parenting classes. They're just hardcore Mexicans that will beat you when you do wrong. And if you do wrong, you're gonna get a bigger whooping. And then eventually you get immune to the whoopings and you just go, woo, just because you gotta do it. Just so they'll stop and be like, ah. You know what I mean? It's like that, but you know what? Like, every kid really looks up to their parents. And like, I looked up to my dad so much, and I still do, and my mom, I look up to them so much that that's the worst disappointment that I could put my cares upon. That's the worst, like coming from them, oh man, like I let them down. That's the worst right there. That's the worst, because we really look up to them. And sometimes they're not the best parents according to us, but they're doing what they gotta do. They have a roof over our heads, they're paying the bills, they got food in the fridge, but they don't tell you how you're doing. Sometimes you need that.
Deep inside, I never felt right. Like, deep inside, I felt accepted, but I never felt right, because as much as I had problems at home, my family I knew cared for me, but it just, they didn't know what to look for. And so I think, you know, I saw the bad I was doing and how it hurt my family, and so it was a struggle, but I never felt right. I ended up pregnant at 17, and my parents never gave up on me. They allowed me to move back home. So I went home, and I didn't know I was pregnant, started showing. So I thought, I'm gonna go tell my homegirls I'm pregnant. I went back to the neighborhood, and my 3 closest homegirls they looked different. They were kicking back, and I came in, and they had a table, a coffee table, and they were doing chiva, which is heroin. And they said, come on, try it. And I said, no, I came to tell you I'm pregnant. And one of my closest homegirls said, F the baby. And at that moment, a switch went off in my head, in my heart, and I said, my kid is not gonna live the life I did. And my kid turned out to be 2 cuates. I had twins, they're identical, and they pretty much made my life change for quite a while.
None of it scared us, which is too bad, because it is a mutated life. And it wasn't that we didn't go to church, and it wasn't that we didn't have God in our lives, or that we didn't have good parents sometimes. But the environment was counter to all that. In other words, the poor parents that tried, the churches, they couldn't defeat the poverty of access, and the poverty of spirit, and the poverty of other things that comes with material poverty that is in these communities. You know what I mean? So I think that's what created the environment that I was in, and why gangs became what it is.
I'm here for all the active gang members, all the active ones that are out there pushing, all right, getting a piece, doing what you gotta do to survive, it's not your fault. Okay? War is in all of our blood from the beginning of time. And there's two kinds of things. There's righteous anger, and there's anger that we do out of, I'll call it just stupidity, because we don't know. Okay? But knowing the damage that it causes, it's going to hurt later. It's going to hurt later. We're going to get down, and I'm going to feel bad for you later, bro. I'm sorry. I'm going to keep on pushing. And a lot of times, the older homie is going to put that gun in our hands and say, just do it. And it's not our fault, because all we know is, you know what? I'm for this all the way, and that's it. But check this out, bro. From my personal experience, going out there, trying to be the baddest, there's always somebody badder than you. Straight up. Size doesn't matter. Man, the homie came at me with a knife. Man, the little homie done shot up the house. The bullets went through the wall and killed him. That's real on my street. That's just real. The murder is crazy, man. It's ugly, it's sad, and look at the families. Straight up. The mom is crying for her son. The homie died in his hands. Come on now. If you love somebody, tell them, hey, bro, let's go home and go to sleep. Let's wake up tomorrow. Handle your own business. That's what I'm here to tell you. I did 6 prison terms, bro, all good. Never ratted. I did what I had to do. I smashed on all my terms, bro. And that respect got me more and more and more and more and more and more alone. By myself. That's not respect. That's not even living, bro. It's not even living.
Well, I think most gangs and clubs are really not, initially not really bad. They're just, anybody who wants to join have peer groups. They do it in well-off communities as well as poor communities, but in poor communities they tend to be these gangs. You know, you have a few guys in the corner, you have your friends, you can start up a little club, you call yourself something. When I was younger, we had a special little club just between me, my brother, and our 2 little neighbors. And I'll tell you, I didn't talk about it in the book, we called it the Putty Club, because we had a cat named Putty Cat. And we called it, so we were the Putty Club. We wanted to imitate this cat. And guess what? We had a gang, not a gang symbol, a symbol of cat claws like this. This was just between us. You know what I'm saying? Kids do this. It was younger, not innocent. But what happens when you're in a gang, you do this, it doesn't become so innocent, you know. Because now you're being pressured by other people, other clubs come after you, you know, who you guys are, they jump you in the corner, you know, now you gotta get your homies behind you, get more people in your club, you know what I'm saying? The clubs become the basis of new gangs because of the environment we're in. Otherwise it would have been an innocent little, it's just my friends were playing marbles or we love soccer or whatever it might be. Now we're fighting for corners and place. So those clubs rapidly were becoming gangified, you know, and mainly because the big gang that covered the whole area, Las Lomas, had been there since the 40s, and most of them were older guys, because most youth gangs are really run by adults. And so these are older guys who were just recruiting off these clubs, young guys, and we were game because we wanted to be part of something big, because once we were getting beat up by other people, so well, where's our protection? Join Las Lomas and they'll protect you. And mainly it was the guys from Sagra who were the other gang that was doing the same thing, recruiting from their little clubs and then chasing us. And so we needed to be in Las Lomas. And then the gang structure becomes much more developed. Then you start thinking about stealing, doing drugs. Right away I started doing drugs. At age 12 I started doing every drug you can imagine, including heroin. I was already moving. Sniffing to pills to heroin, smoking weed, everything was already happening. Really rapidly things were moving. And by 13 I was getting arrested and everything. And by age 15 my parents threw me out of the house. It was like, I dropped out of school, I wasn't working, I wasn't doing anything, I was just, and I don't blame them, to be honest with you. It's not a cool thing the parents throw you out of the house, but on the other hand, it makes sense to me. I was not a good person and I was not going along with anything. And my mom, I think, I was a danger to the rest of the family.
I'd even go a step further and say a lot of us are trapped in our own neighborhoods. Police continually harassing us. I remember going to court. I was like 18 years old, and a judge said to me, "You're going to be just like your uncle." Well, if you already know who my uncle is, help me to not become him. So it was more like a cradle to prison pipeline. It was, you know, it wasn't just the schools preparing you for prison, but it was the people who basically enacted policies.
I look at gangs and how it affected my community. It was like a cancer. Friends who I grew up are no longer here because they're dead. Families, especially mothers, have had their heart broken. Because when we look at gang members, for a lot of individuals, they see just the term gang member, but for mothers, they see their gifts. So we've lost a lot of gifts in our communities. For myself particularly, I lost the mother of my child because she followed me as a gang member. I received a life sentence, and she received a death sentence. And with that being said, my daughter had to grow up without a mother and a father.
There's not a cohesive community that's meeting these troubled kids. If it was, I think we wouldn't have so much. It's a very broken community. The community is broken, so the kids are going to be broken. And there's a correlation. If the community is strong, if the community is healthy, kids are going to be healthy. You understand? You know what I'm saying? It always makes sense to me why gang kids exist and why they do what they do. Now, for example, I really wasn't born to be a killer. I wasn't born to be a drug addict. I wasn't. I gravitated towards those things because my own influence, whatever I didn't have, whether at home, in the community, I thought I could feel it being with the homies, being with the drugs. I remember that scene where I tried to stab that guy, where I stabbed that guy with the screwdriver. There was a culmination of events that got there. I wasn't born to do that. You know what I'm saying? That wasn't what it wasn't even in my nature to do that. You know what I mean? But here I am being pushed in this situation where now I'm stabbing somebody with a rusty screwdriver. So you can see how factors can come in and push the kids into places they don't really want to be at, they shouldn't be at. And you make monsters out of them. You know, they're monsters of our own making. That's my attitude. I'm not saying I wasn't a monster. I'm not saying I wasn't a terrible kid. I don't want to like, how do you say, whitewash what I done. I don't. I did some terrible things. I took part in violence, and I took part in stealing, and I took part in, one thing I didn't take part in was rapes, but the rapes were going on in my neighborhood. Terrible things. I was a monster, a mutated human being, and I didn't get the help I needed at the time, even though eventually I did. A lot of these guys just needed a lot of help, a lot of support. You know, we create an environment that creates monsters, but we don't do what we can to change them. They're human beings. When we say monsters, we just mean the mutated people that come out of the so-called normal community. But we don't realize that we create them. You know what I'm saying? And we won't take responsibility as a society. We don't take responsibility. They're terrible, put them in prison. And all of that contributes to making it worse. Everything we do has only worsened the situation.
90% of all the inmates in our prison system have one thing in common. They dropped out of high school. I've worked a whole life making sure that children go to school, even to the point where I will go to your house and get you out of the cobijas and get your buttons go.
Wow.
Okay? You know why? Because they'll say, oh, sir, what are you doing? I said, because I love you. See, I don't get paid to do that. Because what she doesn't know is I spent 22 years as a probation officer with the Los Angeles County Probation Department. I deal with what they call 601s. And I know if I can get you in school and I get you on the path to graduate from high school, you got a great chance of doing something with your life. So for me, it's about what I call prevention of catching you early and making sure you have support around you. Working with your teachers, working with members who have been gang members, working with the probation department, even working with the police department, and the fact that, you know, when you catch somebody in the street, bring them to my school. I'll educate them, but I need them there first.
Probably the most telling thing was the first day of school was in Watts, and they had no place for me. I went from one classroom to another classroom, no teacher wanted me. I remember the teacher said, I don't got room. They were taking me and finding was a teacher, Miss Jones. I still remember, she said, okay, put them in the corner. And I was building blocks for a whole year in that class. They pretty much ignored me. You know what I'm saying? It was a kind of situation where you didn't feel like anybody wanted you, and I didn't want to be in school. And they would punish you for speaking Spanish. there was a lot of Spanish-speaking kids coming in, and we were all punished. We were sent home early, or we were detained, or we were actually swatted. And I remember once getting swatted by the principal for speaking Spanish in the schoolyard. It was a different time than it is now. But it does impact you. It makes you realize that there's no value. Language, as my wife Trini always points out, is part of who you are. It's your value, it's your culture value, it's your identity. And when it gets crushed, it's very hard to get into another language that's not yours. I think English is very important, but you don't have to destroy the Spanish to do that. But that's what happens. You end up crushing who you are. You have no value, and then you're supposed to learn a new language. And I didn't learn it. We didn't learn that new language. It was just not taught very well. So I think we were just kind of forgotten in that. And I'm talking about the African American and Mexican kids, because African Americans have been here longer than a lot of these Mexicans, but they were treated just as badly, like if they were strangers all the time. You know what I'm saying? Language was one of those things that we couldn't really learn, but we formulated our own way of speaking. And in the Mexicans, it was like what they call Spanglish, but it really wasn't. It was the caló, the mixture of Mexican Spanish and street slang and a little bit of English that created a whole new language, you know. So we created our own, just like African Americans created a whole new way of talking and language and everything else. Street kids do this all the time. It wasn't even just us. Irish immigrants did it when they came 100 years before, and they were in the streets and they were in gangs and they created their own language. You know, everybody does it under those kind of conditions. And we were, at least in LA, the black and brown kids were the ones that were going through that. And I was one of those kids having to go through that.
I guess for me, I'm not from California. I'm originally from Indianapolis. And I think one of the things that started for me is that I'm a product of a single mother. We had two brothers, so there were three of us. But I also had a stepfather in my life. And so early on, he was in my life since I was 2, so I considered him to be my father. But my dynamics in life was kind of different because I grew up with a white mother and a black father. And so in my neighborhood, I grew up in a black community. And so given the kind of skin that I have, I saw the difference between how white folks were treated and how black folks were treated. And so I saw that very early on. And I know that in the schools I went to, because of the family situation that I had to, they tracked me into the lowest tracks as though I wasn't smart enough to do, to do academics. And so I noticed very early on that they would put the white students in the accelerated classes and the black students in the remedial classes. And because my stepfather was black, I was with them. And so because we were working class, they always tracked us early on. And so I think one of the things of why a lot of my friends disappeared as I kind of moved forward with my education is because schools didn't offer a viable alternative for young people. Schools, in many ways, it became like a school-to-prison pipeline, where they were pushing young people, especially African American youth, into the prison pipeline. And I got to see that unfold. And so I saw that in the schools and the institutions in our neighborhoods didn't provide a viable alternative. So young folks started looking for meaning in gangs.
I grew up in Oceanside, Eastside, Pozole neighborhood, went to Laurel Elementary School. It was all good, but as a kid, I started a lot of problems within myself, and I took my family to war, and I took life to war. And it ended up real bad for me. So I got expelled at 6th grade from Laurel Elementary, and then junior high, I went for like 2 months, and then I was on the streets, and that's where I got jumped in, okay? And then from there, boom, started going to juvenile hall at 14 years old. I got out on my 18th birthday. I got expelled from continuation school, got kicked out of Oceanside High School, but then, okay, so I just got this right here for you guys. Okay, so this right here, okay, self-made right here in 1995, this is your guys' school. Through home studies, I graduated. That's what's up. That's what's up, bro. And check this out. I've been through a lot of stuff, man. Grew up in the gutter, gang banging, dragged up and down, gang violence, shootings, all that stuff, this and that, but I wouldn't change it for my life because I know what now I can accomplish.
I dropped out of school in the 9th grade and had my sons, and I went, did trainings. When I moved way far away from where I'm from, I I heard you could get a GD, so I went right here to Palomar and started. I wanted to work with juveniles, and I was thinking a probation officer, because I had heard mother tell me that her son did good with one probation officer, then they changed him, and he did bad. So I thought, I'm gonna study. And so I took one juvenile justice class in Palomar, and I got an A, and I was like, I didn't even have a GD, and I got an A. So I started doing criminal justice, but nobody told me that the things I did in my past were gonna affect that certificate when I went to apply as a probation officer. And so I paid from my own money, you know, for each class, for my own books, and then to go through the whole process of probation to pass the test and to get to the final interview where the man said, we have 3 piles, squeaky clean? Yes, come on. No, never, and maybe someday. He said, you're on maybe someday, but not now. And that was hard. That was hard. And my counselor, Frank Pucci, he said, Alicia, call this number. And that's how I ended up working in juvenile court and community schools. So it ended up being a better thing, because what I do now, you know, versus what I would have done as a PO, you know, I'm happy. But really, when I look back, and especially for teenagers, dropping out of school, I think if anything in my life I regret is that, because I cleaned a lot of toilets, I did a lot of nasty jobs, and until I went back to college, now I'm doing what I love, working with families.
Education wasn't something education actually wasn't something that was pushed in my family. My mom in particular valued work over school. And so, you know, I dropped out of school at a young age, 9th grade. And so it was kind of normal. It was normal. That type of environment was normal in my upbringing. And, you know, I learned later in life really what it was, how powerful education is. And I'm glad that I got a hold of it, you know.
They tracked me very early on. And so I was, you know, in that tortoise track. They didn't take us on field trips. We didn't get to learn another language. We didn't get to do any of the kind of creative things in education. So education for me early on, it was actually a period where I felt when I went to school, I had to accept a certain amount of domination. You know, I had to accept that I wasn't anything in the school. But you know, what was weird for me is that in my school it was segregated, so all the tortoises were black, but if you looked over in this class over here at the rabbits, they were all white. And they got to go on field trips, they got to learn another language, they got to take instrumental classes. For them, education was liberating. You know, it was something that actually helped them grow. For us, it was almost as if they were trying to educate us to be pleasantly subservient. And young people are wise, they're smart, they want to be able to assert themselves, so we rebelled against that. And so the only way we knew how to rebel against that is to fight the institution that was dominating us. So now we become discipline problems. But now that we're discipline problems, nobody ever stops and says, hey, what's going on in your life? You know, what's happening at home? What's happening on the streets for you? Hey, are you okay? Nobody really asked that. And so I never really saw school as this place for liberation until I eventually got to college. Then I actually started to see that education was this beautiful thing that could help me actually navigate the world. It helped me understand, you know, as we were talking about earlier, why there are so many liquor stores in the neighborhood. It helped me understand why so many of my friends started disappearing at the age of 18.
For me, my background wasn't education. My background, I come from a poor community in Santa Barbara. My community, there's gangs, there's the liquor stores, there's the drugs, there's the violence, there's all that stuff that poverty brings.
There's a lot of people like that drink, that have problems. There's a lot of, like, if you went there yourself, you would have saw a lot of bums right there too. And I feel like a lot of people are sad sometimes. You know, there's some stuff that happens in the hood, you know, and it breaks some people's hearts. And I feel like some people just they have a habit of drinking sometimes. But there's always drugs. There's drugs too that some people have there. And not only do grown people see that, but there's also children who are in that are exposed to that, and I feel like it's not good, you know, because all they're doing is just making money off of us, and you wouldn't see a liquor store back to back in a big rich community. You would only see it in the hood, you know.
Can you talk about why that comes to be, the impact that has on a neighborhood, why you see that in some communities and not in others?
Capitalism preys on the poor, you know, and so like give you an idea. My neighborhood, like if you went into a liquor store, it wasn't until I hit 18 that I actually went to my first liquor store where you can actually touch the bottles. You know, I went to a liquor store and there was bottles everywhere. You know, it's like one of those Bevmos around here. I was like, you know, I don't have to talk through a bulletproof glass to get, you know, a bottle of something. And then so, but in my neighborhood, the way they would actually do it is because a lot of people couldn't afford the whole bottle, they would sell it by the cup. So they would give you these little plastic cups, and then they would pour a little bit, and everybody could come up with $1.50, you know, $2 for a little cup of something. So they would actually, and it was completely illegal, you know, but nobody cared that this was what was happening in the community. They cared if somebody shoplifted, but they didn't care if this corporation was absolutely abusing the community. And so why it is that there's liquor stores is that, you know, they do stuff like that. And so they're, you know, they're the drug dealers. You know, if you look, alcohol is responsible for about 80,000 deaths per year. You know, that's including drunk driving as well. Cigarettes, 450,000 deaths per year. And in my neighborhood, they, you know, this is something that they do in black communities heavily, is if you look at the advertising of the cigarette industries towards black communities, they go after kids exponentially higher than they do in the white communities. And so in black communities, they market these menthol cigarettes, which are even worse for your health. And so there's this kind of predatory nature of capitalism that when you have these poor communities, though, you know, you'll go and you'll see these places like check cashing places that will charge you, you know, up to 300, 400% interest over time. And so, you know, check cashing places, rent to own places, all these places that wealthy people make a lot of money off of poverty. I can even, when I was living in Seattle, I lived on the south end of Seattle, and one of their grocery stores got in trouble because here was this grocery store and, you know, same company, one grocery store next to the university, and if you went in there, their fruit section and their vegetable section was beautiful. Their meat looked pink. But when you went to the same place in the south end, same grocery store, but on the south end in what was predominantly a Latino, black, and Filipino community, you would see the fruit have little flies all around. It's the same grocery store, the same cost. But here the quality was different. And this grocery store actually got caught for taking meat from the wealthy communities once it started to go bad, mixing it with newer meat and then selling it in the poorer communities. And so it's that kind of stuff. It's the predatory nature of capitalism that kind of creates these places where very wealthy people realize they can make money from the poor. You can make money convincing the poor that they can rent things instead of owning it, and so that you're always paying to rent. And that's the kind of traps. I mean, as a teacher now, those are the kinds of things, especially that I like to teach young people, is that corporations are oftentimes trapping young people. The way our society is set up that benefits the wealthy at the expense of the poor is a kind of trap to young people.
So I think the biggest aspect of where I grew up, I started in Watts from Mexico. I was 2 years old, and I think it's poverty was the number one thing that really contributed to whatever was going on. It doesn't mean that everybody that's in poor community is going to be in a gang, because like my wife says, she grew up in a very poor community. She didn't join a gang. None of her family members did. But your propensity is going to be more towards the gang because of the lack of resources, the lack of mentorship, good teachers. I'm serious here. There was always one or two good teachers, but most of the teachers were basically indifferent. I always felt that you'll remember the bad teachers and you remember the really good ones, but you don't remember most of them because they were just not very impactful, you know. So these were schools and communities that were lacking, and I think that's why some kids, not all of them, fall through the cracks. There's enough cracks in there.
Proactive, healthy, fun communities, that builds solutions, you know. And you know, like I said, a lot of young people don't know what it is to love themselves, or, you know, because, you know, we're entrenched in poverty and struggle, that it's actually hard to see ourselves.
Wealthier communities, they have better houses, they have better neighborhoods, everything. They have, the city mainly focuses on them, while in like lower income communities, it's mainly the police focusing on just people there, police brutality. And I mean, I witnessed it there's a lot of people who witnessed it. Just rich communities, they don't have to worry about anything. They got money. They don't have to worry about bad stuff happening. They don't have to watch their back.
When I was young, they used to slap us around all the time. I had gotten beaten up by the cops twice. I got beat up twice too. I had 4 friends killed by police.
Well, I remember one young man that I was working with who has since passed away, and he was like, man, I just got out of juvie. I was committed to doing well. I started hanging around these straight A kids, and they were teaching me these other things about school, and I'm walking home from school with this one kid, and the cops come up and say, hey, don't hang out with him. He's gonna get you in trouble. And he's just like, what that does when a cop kind of stereotypes a kid like that, even when they're attempting to change their life and do something for their own life, cops can oftentimes be an obstacle to that change.
For me, so for one, I like to say that I'm not anti-police. I think that as a society we need police. But my experience, so when I was younger, like really young, I remember police in my neighborhood who, when they were there, you know, talking to people. Maybe they'd arrest somebody, but I never looked at them as bad. I actually remember when I was really young, like, couple officers in my neighborhood who would ask us how our moms were doing. So there was this community with our police. As I got older into my early teens, you know, 16, 17 years old, I don't know what happened, but the interactions with the police started to change in the way where cops never asked me like how I was doing. It was more like, what are you doing? Cops wouldn't say, it was more like, where are you going, where are you coming from? It was, you know, what are you doing? And it became more like this over hyper surveillance of us that, you know, I remember as a kid, the cops being really cool. As I was getting older, it became more like, you're really watching everything I'm doing, and you're accusing me of doing things that I'm not doing. And eventually, the situation between cops and myself and my friends and family became, I really see this thing that they call the us versus them, you know, and it's really unfortunate because I'm kind of pro-police. I am anti-police brutality, and police brutality, we think about police brutality, we think about physical harm, but police brutality is emotional, it's spiritual, it's mental, and to play this game with us, and when I say us, me, like, eventually you're gonna make me not like you. And when you become, when there's this distance between us and them happens, I'm gonna avoid them. And when I avoid them, it seems like they come after me even more.
We had, in my communities, for example, we had a lot of racism. We were surrounded by white suburbs that hated us. The sheriff's deputies were like an invading army. And these white communities knew that. Well, we were these old Mexican migrant communities that were surrounded by suburbs, and they hated us. And we were poor. We had dirt roads, no sidewalks, little shacks. They were nice suburbs, and we were like the enemies.
For me, because I grew up with a white mother and a black stepfather in a black neighborhood, I got to see two sides of the same coin. I always call my mom the American Express card because she didn't want to leave home without her. Because I was never pulled over when I was in the car with her. Never. I was pulled over by the time I hit 18, 13 times by police. And every time it was either with my stepfather in the car or my friends in the car with me. And I had a lot of interactions with the police where I absolutely despised them. Because, again, it wasn't ever, you know, you were talking earlier, it wasn't ever like the police were there, hey, how are you doing? It was always to arrest, to try to get an arrest. And so I noticed this huge difference between the race. You know, if I was with my mother, then it was almost like I had it was like a form of apartheid, like I had a pass. But if I was with my friends, I didn't.
If you were that kid, you would worry a lot because, I mean, you would be thinking about getting shot, locked up, just dying, prison, anything. You think a lot about that. You can't really think about your future when you're in that situation. I mean, you do, but it's not like it comes to you first thing in mind. But sad, you know. You gotta see all these people out here doing that. We can't do anything about it. Can't beat the system.
Well, I think they'd be necessary if they played the role of, or maybe not play the role of being another gang. They just act like another gang with arms and money and support, and they're never gonna pay a price for what they do, unlike the other kids that they're messing with. If they just become the big gang in the neighborhood, and we know them, we start seeing them as a gang. And unfortunately, that meant that some of us would shoot at them too. And he did it, but also in my neighborhood, we were at war with the police. We shot down the helicopter one time, the ghetto bird. We were the only two neighborhoods that ever did that in Southern California, in Riverside and our neighborhood. The only two ever. And we used to shoot at them from high ends of our neighborhood. We were the hills. Las Lomas means hills. We were called the hillbillies, because we were living in the hills. We knew where to shoot people, rival gangs as well as cops. I have a newspaper article where the cops are pointing, like dramatic at the bullet holes that on the car unit that we had done. So we were at war with them, and so I know that there's two sides to it, because I know that they did treat it this way. We also treated them pretty badly. But I think the best thing to do is not be at war. If the police could not be at war with us, that would help a lot, because a war environment creates more war.
I think we're investing more in prisons and institutions than we are in our youth. And it's obvious the amount of prisons there are, especially in California. From what I understand and what I've read and researched is that there's more prisons in California than all of the United States. It's a moneymaker. And juvenile hall, and especially here in North County, there's so many of our kids are locked up. I have a bill of a parent, and it's over $2,000 for 1 month that her son, who was a skater, who was always truant, $2,000. I was saying $1,500. I just reread the bill. It's over $2,000. So what is the community doing for our kids? There's not enough help. And I think even there was a program that they had tons of funding. And what surprised me is when I was trying to refer our students, they said, no. We want kids who have not been in the system. And I said, but if you reach kids who have been in the system, they're going to be the ones who talk to the youngsters and make a difference. But they invest in prevention when what I see is the need for activities for youth. When I was young, I remember there used to be, we had little parks throughout everybody's neighborhood, and there would be this young guy or girl who would pull up in a van, and they'd have volleyballs and baseballs, and they would just play with us. They were young, they were in college, they were cool, and they cut those fundings. Training programs. When I dropped out of school, I went to a training program. And I did end up getting a pretty decent job, but back then I was doing so bad with other stuff that it didn't work for me. But I know a lot of our student population, if they could get into a training program, they would excel and it would keep them busy, but there's not enough. Hey, I can't take my granddaughters to the movies. It's at least for 3 of them, I'm gonna pay at least $60. So the community needs to cry out more to their officials and let them know we need more. We need to. I think the biggest failure is that instead of investing money in after-school activities, we're investing in the prison pipeline. And I went out to East Mesa. It's next to men's institutions, and it is designed 2-tier like a men's prison. That's where we failed. Instead of investing that money into youth by giving them more skate parks, more activities to do after school, we're investing it in detaining them, and it doesn't help.
You know, my wife has this great concept of poverty of access, and I think that that's one of the big poverties. You don't have access to things that other people have. And so everybody wants to be in a club, have their little friends, and but when you don't have access to either schoolyards or parks or organized clubs that are healthy organized clubs, social recreation, boys clubs or whatever, you don't have access to these things. Some of those clubs start mutating. They're mutations of normal life. You start mutating into now it's not normal. They start justifying it with a term like we're insane, we're crazy, we're la vida loca, you know. And then, see, we're the crazy guys, you know, as you start justifying that you're just not like everybody else. And then you have enemies that gives you life, because all of these guys are enemies, and we got to go after them, and we got to be strong. We got to get built, and you got to get, you know, fight. We fighting all the time. It's part of just. I hate to say this, but it's kind of like a community of men, because women also have it, but in a different way. But the community of men is you got to prove yourself. You got to be able to fight. You got to be able to not be scared. Somebody puts a gun to you, you can't run. You know, our attitude in my gang was you get shot, you don't run. If you run, it was worse. You know, it's better that you stand there and get shot, which is dumb. But you know, when you're in the gang, that's what people expected of you. Then for you, because if you ran, the hell you would get for doing that was worse. So you start creating this mutated culture of boys, and most of it is what I call a death cult, because what kept us alive was death. In other words, when our homies died, we kept them alive. When our homies got shot, when one of our enemies got shot, every death brought us alive. Every funeral got us more entrenched. You know what I mean? It didn't scare us like people say, "Oh my God, funeral, that should stop you." Yeah, some people probably did, but for us, it got us more like, I'm more into it now. You know, it's just what happens. The opposite happens. Even going to jail was not a deterrence. It was like jail was a rite of passage. We're gonna all go to jail. We're all gonna learn about jail. We're all gonna be good at it. You know.
I just feel like there should be more sports or programs, you know, that kids could get into instead of having to join a gang or doing other stuff that they shouldn't be doing. But they should be focusing on their education, or if they're good in something, then they should actually they should get into it, you know, instead of thinking that you're all hard, you know. But I feel like you should just join a sport, join a program, anything that's like that you enjoy. I feel like you should join it. Sometimes I just feel like they don't care.
Okay, well, I would like to, I'm very passionate about this because in the emotional regulation and how it can start at a young age where they can't control it. And I tried for 5 years. I saw signs at a young age what was going on with my child. And it just kept escalating, escalating. I was very active in trying to find help, getting counseling. Let's go here. Well, then the insurance, oh, you only have 30 days. You gotta either sign up again, go somewhere else. It's very hard to find a adolescent, teen psychologist, psychiatrist that you can establish a relationship with. Or here I was, a mother crying out for help. They put my child in one room and me in another room, and no, we need to work together because this is going on at home. Okay, 5 years later, here we are. Here we are in a system. Here we are I love this school. This has nothing, but here we are in a court school. And the programs that became available after the trouble was shocking to me. Where were they before? Where were these programs that should have been offered before the trouble with the law and getting an assistant? Where were they? I still don't see.
For me, as you look down this panel, you hear education, you hear self-motivation and those things that you find that brings you up, and you also hear about program. There is no one sure thing, but you add all these things together, and what you will have is an opportunity for an individual to start making better choices. As youngsters, one of the things that I really truly believe in, and it's what Project Aware is all about, is having those emotional literacy skills. As youth, when we get angry, we tend to get violent as if that's how you deal with anger. The same thing is with us as as individuals, when we get disappointed, kids, they sometimes start drinking. We call them substance abusers. We call them gang members, but a lot of times they're just emotionally illiterate. They're not having the ability to deal with their emotions. So what you have to start doing is you have to start giving your kids the same skills that a coach gives a basketball player on how to shoot the hoops. We need to start teaching our kids how to deal with their emotions. And believe it or not, if you haven't taught your kids, they're learning from the streets. And what you have is basically a culture of kids who are emotionally illiterate. And they're basically just reacting to their emotions instead of taking time and actually working through their emotions. One of the things that I always say is this right here: no one loves me more than my mother. My mother has disappointed me. So I can't get high every time I deal with disappointment. So we have to learn how to deal with our emotions. We have to develop social skills, because guess what? That individual that bumped into you, he might not even known that he bumped into you. And now here you are chasing him, hoping that he would say, excuse me, hoping that he would give you some form of respect. And when he looks at you, he's gonna say, oh man, I apologize, I didn't even know I bumped into you. But you've taken it on as if it's something that you have to get your respect about. So for a lot of us, it's about learning those basic social skills. It's about learning those emotional literacy skills. It's about having a safe place to work through some of the trauma that has happened in our life. And I'm not even talking about as adults, but as kids. And I saw a great individual who spoke about trauma, and it didn't have nothing to do with his homeboy getting shot, but it's the things that we deal with, like watching our father and our mother have a dispute, not growing up with the dad. For a lot of individuals, you might not think that's nothing, but that's a form of trauma. There are individuals in La Jolla and Encinitas, guess what? They get therapy for that. Us young Hispanic men and young black men, you know what we get? We get a bottle. That's not dealing with the trauma.
How can we as a society recreate that love and acceptance and visibility and provide it in a very proactive way? And I think that right there is the magic question. How do we provide that for our young people? How do we have teachers learn that every time you push, like the students will say, I dropped out of school. And I said, no, you got pushed out of school. I often say I dropped out of school in 9th grade, but ultimately when I think about my life, I got pushed out because nobody was looking for me. Nobody was really trying to help me and provide resources for me, at least not that I remember. And so oftentimes it's like those streets provided something for me that was missing somewhere else. And I found people, I still have a lot of friends who are, I have friends who are doing life in prison. I have friends who are still caught up in the streets and they're still, doing drugs and alcohol. And when I see them or I hear them, that love is resonating because I say, how are you? How you been? Like, are you doing good? You doing all right? And even though their lives aren't doing all that great, of course I have a lot of friends I had to completely cut ties with. But I have friends who still, they're caught up in their same situations, but still a lot of times ask me how I am, and they wish me the best. And not only that, they're asking about my family. They're asking, how's your mom and how's your daughters? Because they love me. And even though we are caught up in this negative lifestyle, there's that love, there's that brotherhood, that sisterhood, that acceptance that every young person, every adult person, every elder deserves. We're gonna find it somewhere.
And we have to show these kids that we love them. We have to invest in them. One of the kids was out there doing he was showing his report, and he was asked what made him change because he was running in gangs as well. And he said the book that he read helped him change, but he also said JCCS, that helped him change. He said the investment that the teacher put in him made him feel like he wants to change his life. That's where it's at. We have to show these kids that we love them. When we cannot give up on them. They didn't give up on me. See, love is one of the biggest deceptions. They call it, love is one of the biggest lies because everybody tell you they love you. You know what I'm saying? I had gang members. I come from a nation, Latin King nation, where we got chapters all over the world. They all want to tell you, Amor de Rey, I love you. You're my brother, hermanito. But when you get shot, when I got shot, and when I was facing life in prison, the only one that was there for me was my grandmother. That was where the love was at. I didn't see it. I never saw that love. You know what I'm saying? Because I didn't want to see it. She tells me, it's time for you to go upstairs. You got to go to school. I don't want to hear that. They're showing me true love, but that wasn't the true love. True love was coming at home. That's the real family. You want to know where family's at? Your family's your mother, your father. And if you don't got your mother, your father, your teacher. You know what I'm saying? There's people out there that love you, that's willing to invest in you, but you have to let them know, I'm here, I want the help. You know what I'm saying? And I promise you, you got people out there that are willing to help, willing to invest in you. Just understand, we love you, we love you, we love you. That's real talk. I'm tired of hearing I'm tired of seeing my peoples, my Latino brothers, my black brothers, and even my white brothers dying in the street for nothing, for a neighborhood that at the end of the day, you're not even gonna be at, because you're gonna be in the cemetery 6 feet under or in the penitentiary doing life. Wow. You know what I'm saying? And that's what we have to think about, invest in our youth, man. That's what we have to do. I know President Trump, not my president, but Mr. Trump, you know what I'm saying? He talked about he want to take the money. That's the problem too. We're not investing in these programs. If we closing down the programs, if we closing down these after-school programs, then what do our kids have? They don't have nothing. They're going to go back into the neighborhood and do what they're going to do because they have nothing. They have no alternative. You understand what I'm saying? And so that's all I wanted to say. Thank you. I'm inspired, actually, man. I'm really inspired. I did not want to talk. I did not want to say nothing, but it was just so inspiring, and I just felt I wanted
Mijo, what's your name again?
Tariq.
Tariq. He's absolutely right, but let me just share this little bit. There are 3 types of love, okay? Eros, philos, agape. If you understand what those words mean, when you get in the gang, there's a philos love. It's called the brotherly love. It's with the Philadelphia. The problem with philos love is I love you as long as you do what I tell you to do.
Right.
Okay, and then there's eros. That's called erotic love. That's when you start getting feelings for a girlfriend or boyfriend and that kind of stuff. That also has conditions because it goes away. The love that your mom has for you, the love that we all seek is called agape. You know what that means? It means unconditional. I love you because of who you are, not what you do. And that's the kind of love that we need to show our young people. I don't have to like some of the stuff you do. In fact, sometimes I hate it, but I'll never turn from you. I'll always love you no matter what. Okay? That's the love we need to show our kids. You're right.
So growing up, I had a lot of decisions. I could have engaged in sports. I kind of wish I had more of a father figure. I feel like some type of mentoring as a young adult probably would have helped me. Some type of, a man to just kind of show me the ropes, kind of show me that, that lifestyle ain't gonna get you nowhere, but check this out. If you want this, come do this. Check out what I got. I didn't have that adult. I didn't have that young man, showing me that it was possible. I thought running the streets was pretty much my only choice.
Do whatever you can to learn how it is to be a youth today, because that's another thing. I was one in probably 10,000 back in my day. I'm going to be 55. But for you guys and the youth today, there's just, it's over the top, and a lot of youngsters are feeling the danger of just walking to school. And parents and staff sometimes don't understand, why do I carry a shank? Not that you should, but it's because the streets are dangerous, and I think they need to have a better understanding of youth, and that means going to parent meetings, getting involved with schools, being a team with teachers and if there's a parent advocate at the school, a parent liaison, parents really taking the time, it's worth it, and becoming a community with the school and also others.
I mean, I think the one thing is just to, they can find out what their value is, what the worth is, because that contributes a lot. I didn't feel like I was worth anything of value to anybody, so I'm gonna do whatever I wanna do. That would get me into a lot of trouble, send me to jail. Really try to look for help, talk to people. I didn't really have any mentors growing up, except my dad, later when I went to prison, but I didn't really have anybody I felt like I could look up to, talk to about anything that I was going through. You know, my dad had teachers and mentors when he was growing up. I had people that tried to help me when I was in high school, but it wasn't to the point where I really felt like they were like some strong mentor in my life that was gonna help change my life. There are people like that to help, that wanna do that, and it just takes the effort for somebody, an individual, to want to look for that person, because they're out there. You know, I'm a mentor. I try to help as many young people as I can. You know, and it's not just about also changing your mind, but changing your attitude. That helps. You know, how you want to live your life. You know, is this the life that we want to live? And also knowledge, education is very important. Not just the education you learn from school, but the education about who you are, your history, your person, what's in your blood, your ancestors. That's also very important, you know, because then you realize what you know about where you come from and how beautiful, you know, your lineage goes and what it means. Then you start realizing, wow, there's a lot going on here in my life that means more to me than just what my 4 blocks is. You know, that's important.
Yeah, and I feel, coming off that, what I tell people, including in the prisons, and like what I said earlier, the most important thing is you have to own your life. And you can't own it if you don't value it, if you don't think what you do matters. So you have to really see how your life really matters, how what you do matters, how your choices and who you hurt and don't hurt, and why you have to think about what you do. That's ownership. If you don't want to own it, give it to the drugs, give it to the gang, give it to other people. Yeah, just give it away. Yeah, that's a lot of guys do because they don't feel like they got anything worth living for. So I'll die for the value, I'll die for my nation, you know, that's what they do. And what we try to teach people is to live for the value, live for the family, live for something. But you can't make that up, it's gotta be real for them. What is it that they want in this world, that they need, that they want to be part of, and they gotta own that process.
Foremost, I would tell them not to give up, to go ahead and take that leap of faith. I remember when I made a decision, it took a very long time to really make that decision, and finally one day one of my mentors was telling me, you know what, you need to make a decision. You can't sit on both sides of the table.
I grew up in an area of Los Angeles called Boyle Heights. If any of you familiar with Boyle Heights, remember when I was growing up there, I didn't know any of this. It was just being part of the neighborhood. But it's supposedly the most gang-infested area in Los Angeles for Latinos. And as far as school, went to public school, and it was a struggle for me. No father around. I had a father, but he just wasn't around. He was, I guess, making money to make sure we had a roof over our house, and we had food on the table. And but I was very fortunate because I got myself involved in going to the Boys and Girls Club. And one of the things that helped me the most is when I was in elementary school, they came over into our classroom and said, does anybody want to play music, an instrument? So I would do anything to get out of class. So I raised my hand, and they gave me a trumpet, and I started playing music. That little instrument helped me stay away from a lot of stuff. And when I was a teenager, believe it or not, I know I don't look it anymore, but I played for 10 years in a rock and roll band. It helped me through college and helped me get. And I'll talk a little bit later about the life. I don't want you to think, because you see me up here in the tie and titles I had, it was an easy life. It wasn't.
You know, I don't think we have a gang problem. I think we have a problem where we've abandoned our children. You know, young people, if you have an after-school program, if you have sports programs, if you have something that they can go to that's meaningful, they will always do that. Every time I've seen that. If you have a program, they will go to that. But if you don't do that, they're going to become very creative in finding things. And I think actually gangs are incredibly creative. If you look at Crips, a lot of people don't understand what Crips and how Crips began. Crips were heavily influenced by the Black Panther Party. Stands for Community Revolutions Inter-Party Progress. And then Bloods was Black Liberation Organization of Defense. These were political organizations that started off that then later changed. But these were organizations that started off to help the communities. But over time, because they weren't supported, then they get corrupted. And you started seeing a big problem in the 1980s where you start seeing these abandoned jobs. Used to be, you could actually go, graduate from high school, get a job in a factory, and get paid fairly decently. Those jobs disappeared. So now the #1 equal opportunity employer becomes who's selling drugs. And if you need to survive, if you don't have a family, if you don't have a steady source of income, that gang will provide that for you. I think that's the tragedy. Everybody wants to talk about the cartels in Mexico, but they don't want to talk about the economic conditions that created those cartels. Cartels provide jobs when the government doesn't. Gangs do the same thing. Gangs provide meaning for young people. If you actually look, and if we were to go on this board, we could list a whole number of things like why young people join gangs. Protection, family, money, sense of meaning. But if you look at how our system deals with it, when you incarcerate a young person for being in a gang or because of some gang activity, does that deal with the fact that they needed protection? Does it deal with the fact that they needed money? It doesn't deal with any of those leading causes of why people go into gangs. And it actually makes it worse because once you go into the prison system, then you have to click up. Not everybody does, but there's a huge pressure to identify for protection within the prison system.
One of the things I have always said when I do classroom presentations, and I start out with, is that I do this, #1, in honor of the Unit 800 students I worked with who were maximum security males. I was a teacher's assistant, and I was allowed to do a drug and alcohol course because that was my study at the time. And one of the things I know is that had they had a program like this, but more activities, after school activities or mentors or people coming in, they would not be doing life. I think #1 is more after school activities with college students, universities, actually paying them something too so they can put that time. It's cool to be a volunteer, but when you're a college student and a university student, it's difficult. And also law enforcement, to have them getting to know in some very hardcore neighborhoods, like in Chicago, New York, when they have community policing, police that actually get to know the young people, it makes a difference. Some people, youngsters who were gang involved, end up wanting to become law enforcement. And so I think that's a big plus.
I think it has to be more than training, because if you talk to most officers, they'll say, well, yeah, you learn what you learn in the academy, but then you learn on the job what you're actually supposed to do. And so I think we have to change the interactions on the job. One is in the drug war. The problem is, imagine this, as a police officer, you've been working on the job for 25 years, and you start off, there's a drug problem, and after all your years of work, there's still that same drug problem. So take the whole drug issue. That's not a criminal justice issue. That is a mental health and it is a medical issue. Take that away from police. Therefore, you get police kind of interacting in the community in a different way. So what you have now is police officers, especially when marijuana was illegal, you're having police officers have interactions with a community that, 50 to 60% of people have done marijuana, so they become criminalized too. And so you change the interactions that police have. So the police shouldn't just be about arrest. Police should be about being protectors and kind of guardians of a community, rather than just arrest. But because we have officers doing so much, they're making sure homeless folks aren't over in this park for the business purposes. They're making sure, hey, this drug isn't being used here. Well, if we actually focus more on community policing, where police can actually have interactions with the community that just don't lead to arrest, then I think you would have the community trust them a little bit more. There's this great documentary about policing in Canada, and I used to go to school up in Seattle, and I would always drive up to British Columbia, and I would hang around Heroin Alley up there, and I would just kind of study policing, because that's kind of what I did in graduate school. And the way the police interact with heroin addicts was so different up there. You would see them walk around and start talking to people, hey, how are you doing? And people say, oh, you know, I relapsed this time and I'm really struggling with this. Well, the police weren't going to arrest them. They said, hey, we got this program here in a bed waiting for you. Here it is. When you're ready, I want you, once you see me on the street, I'll be down here tomorrow. I can get you in that bed tomorrow. And they had a lot of services. And I can remember there was this one officer who said he just got out, you know, he's a Canadian officer, and he's like, I just got out of training, I was ready to go bust some heads, make some arrests. And he said, but I saw these other veteran officers just talking with people. And then once I started talking with people, I realized that they weren't criminals, they were just struggling. And it changed his mindset towards people. So now his interactions were a lot more humane rather than just criminalize, criminalize, criminalize. That's the kind of transformation we have to have in our communities.
Yeah, I think that one of my things too is, you know, Chris and I and a group of people went up to Idaho once to do a workshop with Nez Perce Sheriff's Department. And one of the things that, you know, they brought us in as, you know, one professors and formerly incarcerated individuals to work with them because they wanted to learn about what they could be doing better. And, you know, I think one of the things that they said was that, you know, we're there to arrest people or whatever. And it's like, why can't you be there in a sense, kind of like a social worker? You know, cops aren't social workers, but that doesn't mean you can't think like one or find solutions. And I think that I really think that there's such this disconnect. Police aren't trained in emotional intelligence. They're not trained. They're not trained in a lot of areas. They're just trained to really go out and police communities. And I think that that creates a big disconnect. That I know that in Santa Barbara there's this tactic where they rarely hire police from that community. You know, they hire from outside. And so when you hire police who aren't from their communities, ultimately they're not connected to that community. And I always said, you know, it'd be great if we had a police department where majority of the people in that police department know that community, know the families from that community, knows, because every community has a culture, has traditions, and has a way of being, that if the police that worked in that area were from there, they're going to have more of a emotional connection to that area. If you're not from that area, there's no emotional connection at all. And I think that that's a very important part to think about. You know, do you police people you care about, or do you just police people that you don't know? And that's that disconnect. You know?
If the public perception, people that have never met a kid that's in a gang or a parent of a kid that's in a gang member, if their assumption is kids join gangs because of the failure of the parents, what would you have to say to those people?
No, I think if you really want to get to the root of the cause, economics. Parents have, especially in California, they have to survive. And I didn't understand that. My parents came from Mexico to give me a better life, but they were always gone. So that they are to blame, no. Plus, back then there weren't parent meetings, there weren't programs like juvenile court and community school momentum learning. So parents didn't know. Now at least we're having more outreach for parents to learn about the gang situation. Things like we're doing in juvenile court and community school, just letting parents know what's out there. But I don't see it as the parent's fault. And there are cases where a parent has not learned to be a parent. You know, I was 17. I actually was very fortunate to find a Chicano counselor who, him and his wife, took me under their wings and helped me, or else I would have ruined my twin's life. And he really coached me as how to discipline, how to raise, how to teach, how to read to my child. And we don't have enough programs reaching out to young teen parents. Or, you know, I look at third generation gangbangers, second generation gangbangers. Some of them, they love their kids. And if you provide the help, you know, they're gonna go for it. They are.
Parents, one of the things, because I have never been in a gang, I always ask my kids why. Why? I just want to know why. And the majority of the time, it's because they needed to belong to something. It's hard out there now. Mother and fathers are, yeah. Mamas and dads are both working. You know, you're working double shifts, you're working, nobody's there. Or you come home, you're tired, you're pissed, and they tell you they were suspended, and then you just, you know, we do what we do. We get mad, we go off and regret it when we go to bed. And sometimes these kids, I don't care how big or how little they are, stature-wise, mentally, age-wise, they have to feel they belong somewhere. And if they don't feel they belong in the family, they're gonna go and find it on the street, bottom line. So just love your kids, and not saying every parent, every kid that was in a gang had bad parents, not at all. But we're in a different age now, a different, you know, everybody's broke, we gotta work a lot, we're not home. And so just please just be there for your children and let them know that you love them, hug them. You know how many parents and kids have been in my office and I said, when was the last time you guys hugged? They couldn't even tell me. So I make them. They have to hug. And then they both usually start to cry because it's like that feeling, you know? So hug your kid. If they push you away, hug them every single day. Tell them you love them every single day. Tuck them in when you get home. Give them a kiss. I love you. That's all. I want to hug you. Get away, Mom. Eventually, they're going to want it. Force them to hug you back. Not like the, yeah, okay. Hug them. Mean it. Hug them like you're never going to see them again, is what I tell them. Hug your mom like you're never going to see her again. Hug your child like you're never going to see him again. Because when they walk out that door, if they go on the street, you may never see each other again. Hug your kid.
If anybody was somebody who you could not rescue or change, it would have been me as a 14, 15, and 16-year-old. And people, when I tell them where I was, which is only usually within a context of a presentation, they're surprised. Because I tell parents, people change. And I've seen it, you know, and I believe in all our students that if we can get them the resources they need, if we can get in their parents' ears about loving them. You know, I remember Reggie Washington doing a parent meeting, and there were many fathers there, and he asked them right in their face, when's the last time you've hugged your son and said, I love you? And not one of them could say they had. They think, parents sometimes, that love is providing a roof and the food, but our students, our kids need to feel the love from their parents. And so that would be one of the big things too, is just getting more out there about the needs that parents have to be part of our team, part of our community.
I used to teach up at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, and a lot of privileged students up there, and they would always ask me this question: well, what can we do to kind of stop gangs? And first of all, I think it's great that young people are organized in groups. I think the question is, how do you funnel that energy and activity into something more positive? But you know, the thing I would always ask them is, these were students who were on a college campus where if they had any mental health issues, they could go get free services. If they had all these extracurricular activities, I think there were probably like some 200 student organizations they could join.
Even medical.
Yep, if they had a medical issue, they could go get free medical care. They had many, you know, if they wanted to learn about basket weaving, they could go take a class on that. If they wanted to learn another language, they could go take, they had all these resources. And they were saying, hey, what can we do to help young people who don't have this? I was like, just provide them with the same things that you have. And I think ultimately that's it. You know, all of this enforcement on gangs is really an enforcement on inequality. Deal with the inequality. Provide young people, working class children, poor children, low income children, with the same resources that we provide people in Encinitas, in La Jolla. You won't see this. But see, they don't want to do that. They don't want to do that because that requires that they have to give up something that they probably don't deserve. They have to give up some of the wealth that they've accumulated over the years. We need to have an equal school system. It shouldn't be that they pay $24,000 per head in La Jolla for every student and $8,000 here. And deal with that inequality, you don't have a gang problem. The gang is a symptom, it is not the cause.